Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be going through and talking about some of the notable Overwatch League free agents who are still unsigned, or at least there are no rumors about them being signed. I'm going to talk about where I think they could end up, what teams would be good landing spots for them, or where I could see them being a pretty good fit. Almost every player on this list is a player who was in the league last season. There's one exception of a player who was not in the league last season, but you'll see who it is when we get there. And I also want to say that due to, of course, the unfortunate news that we received on Sunday about the passing of Alarm, I have opted not to include any type of flex support theorizing for the Philadelphia Fusion. And I just feel like that's just not cool, and it's too early for that type of thing, so I'm not going to talk about any of that. I'm not even talking about flex supports in general, just because for a number of reasons. One of them just because of Alarm, such a fantastic player who we lost far too soon, and it's an unfortunate thing that we have to acknowledge happens in life. People die, and it stinks, and some people die way too young. So with that being said, I hope you understand that I will not be talking about flex supports for that reason. Yeah. Let's move on, though. Let's talk about some of the players that I have on here. I have a list of, I don't know, it's more than 10 players, but it's really, a lot of them kind of grouped together, and you'll see why. But I want to start with the first player, someone who's been in the league since 2017 or 2018 and is not currently signed to a team. That is EQO. As things stand, EQO is not a member of any Overwatch League team, but I do think there is one team where he would be a pretty good fit, and that is with the Vancouver Titans. The Vancouver Titans have not announced any players yet, but there are several rumors about this roster, featuring Aztac, the flex sport from the Toronto Defiant, Shockwave, returning from the Fusion, spent his rookie season with the Titans, now coming back to the Titans, Aspire being on this team, Massa being on this team, of course, Aspire from Toronto, Massa from the Atlanta Reign, and then the only rookie signing that they have kind of talked about that is rumored is False, who was with Bobby Wasabi, and I believe he was with American Tornado before that. So it is a Western-looking roster based on everything we have seen. It is a Western team consisting of Western players. But when you look at their lineup, right, Aspire, Shockwave, both of those players are your hit scan players, right? Now, Shockwave does have a good echo, and we know he has a good echo. It's something we've kind of seen him be known for, but he's mainly a Widow, a Cassidy, and Ashe, and Hanzo. That's kind of his main thing. Whereas then Aspire plays a lot of those same things, right? He plays the Ashe, the Hanzo, the Widow, the Cassidy. He also plays the Tracer. So they don't really have a dedicated flex DPS player, and I think if you're going to go for a Western roster, you're going to go for a Western flex DPS player. EQO is among the best, and he'd be playing alongside Shockwave, someone who he spent the last season with, though they didn't play a ton together because of visa issues with the Fusion. So I think EQO is a really good signing for the Titans. I think if you're going to build this Western roster and you're going to have a roster where you're building around some players that are veterans and some young talent as well, but I think you pair EQO with Aspire, with Shockwave, you have a really solid DPS trio, a really solid, well-rounded DPS trio. And EQO gives you what you don't have, right? With your Genjis, your Pharas, your Junkrats, right? Those are the types of heroes that he brings. Even, something like a Doomfist, right? So I think that's a really big signing. I think it would be a really great signing. So to me, if you make the signing, you're Vancouver, you look like a really strong team. It helps round out kind of that DPS trio, which looks like DPS and really important going into Overwatch 2. So I think EQO to Vancouver would be a really good landing spot for EQO, and it would be a really good move for the Vancouver Titans. Next, I want to move on to a trio, not even a trio, 4 different main support players who I think could land, various different spots throughout the league, but These are all Korean main support players who I think could be good fits for two specific teams, but there's other teams that they could obviously be good for as well. So I'm looking primarily, to me, the best one available. If you're going to sign a main support for the 2022 season in your Korean roster, of the ones that haven't been signed, haven't been rumored to be signed, I think you have to go for Sanguinar, right? He's the one exception on here that was not a player on a roster in 2021, but he was on the 2020 London Spitfire roster, the last Korean roster they had. Very good player. He's been playing for O2 Blast, which has been an incredible team in Korea in the past year. They have been one of, if not the best teams in just contenders in general over the past year or so. If you look at 2021 contenders results, they were victorious in both Season 1 and Season 2 of Korean contenders, beating out Talon Esports. So Sanguinar was on one of the top teams in the league. They also, if you go back even further, though, Sanguinar wasn't with the team at that point in time. In 2020, they beat out Runaway in Season 1 of Korean contenders. So they do have a very successful kind of stint going on, and they also were, more recently, they played in the NetEase Esports X tournament, the winter version of that, where they were once again victorious in that, and that was going up against other teams as well, playing against stuff like, your Chinese teams or things like that. Now, it should be noted that O2 Blast made a roster of players who were not really O2 Blast players. They had Pelican and Chio and Finn on this roster. So a bit of a different roster, but still a mostly similar roster in terms of like Overwatch League level. But Sanguinar is somebody who I thought looked really, really good in 2020. I think he deserves another shot in the Overwatch League. I think he should be on a team. I think you have to look at the two main Korean teams right now that don't have a main support announced, and that would be New York and Philadelphia. Neither of those two teams have announced any type of like Lucio, Mercy player, Brig player, stuff like that, and that's Sanguinar's kind of bread and butter. The rumors with New York are they're going to have I keep saying that, Gangnam Jin and Myeonbong on the team. But I think you add Sanguinar, you don't have to play him all the time. He kind of gets you that really strong Lucio play that you would need. I think that's really, really good. Fusion look like they're building an all-Korean roster. And I think main support is something they're going to need. Because it seems like that's a really big position you're still going to need to fill. Even if double flex support is what a lot of teams are opting to go for, you're still going to need someone that can play your main support heroes. So I think that's a good signing there. But also, you have more veteran names like IDK and Jecse who are available. I think those two are secondary. If you're going to go after somebody, I think you'd rather go after somebody like Sanguinar or even possibly ANSOONJAE from the Toronto Defiant. To me, that is kind of what you're going to really want to plan around, or players who are a little bit younger and have not shown as much in terms of their peak. That, to me, Jecse and IDK, we know who they are. We know what they are. To me, they're not really players that I would consider going after at this point, because you know what they are. And chances are you're not going to get much more out of them than what you already saw. But I think with Sanguinar and with ANSOONJAE, there's potential for more, which I think makes them more desirable signings. So if I'm New York or I'm Philadelphia, those are some of those players I'm eyeballing. Sanguinar to me is number one. ANSOONJAE is probably number two. And then IDK and Jecse. I'd say I'd rather have Jecse than IDK, but it's pretty close for them. One of the interesting ones, though, for me now is Gwangboong. Now, Gwangboong, of course, spent last season with the NYXL. First half of the season, we didn't really see a lot of Gwangboong, though he did win the Widowmaker 1v1 that was a part of the June Joust. But I feel like as the season progressed, we got to see a lot more of Gwangboong, and as New York started to look better later in the season, Gwangboong was a big part of that. Now, potentially we could see Gwangboong return to New York. They're, like I said, their roster right now that is rumored is Yaki and Flora. So if they needed double hit scan, which could very well be the meta, Gwangboong would be a good option to bring back. And I don't think that New York will write off the possibility of bringing a player back. But under these kind of conditions, the way I'm going with this, I'm not going to look at potential returns, though it's possible Gwangboong returns to New York. I think the team that probably benefits the most from Gwangboong outside of a team that, has nothing, like the LA Valiant, who have not signed anybody. But you look at the way that the roster has been built, I think a team that could really benefit from signing him is the Boston Uprising. Now, yes, they do have Striker on this team, and Striker is a hit scan player, but Striker's more known for his Tracer, right? So you're not going to have Striker mostly playing your Cassidys or your Widowmakers if you don't need him to be playing them, because you want him on Tracer. And if you need Tracer Ashe or Tracer Cassidy or Tracer Widow, you need a hit scan player, right? And we know Valentine is not that. Valentine is a flex DPS player. He's going to play your Genji. He's going to play your Doomfist, your Pharah, your Echo, right? That's what Valentine is known for. So Gwangboong would help make up for some of the places where Striker is lacking, and he would make up for some of the holes now that you have when you have your hit scan player as your Tracer. If you need that Tracer Cassidy, Gwangboong gives you that. So while I certainly think Gwangboong could be a fit for a number of teams, just who want a hit scan specialist, I think he is probably going to be going to a team like Boston, where they have a Tracer player, but they need another hit scan player, right? We already saw Happy get taken off the market. He went to Washington, so that makes him a possibility there. There's also Jerry. He's available. He's not on a team. I don't think he'd return to Boston, though I suppose it's possible. But those are, Gwangboong and Jerry are players where when you think about teams that just could need a second hit scan player who maybe won't play all the time, but will play a decent amount of the time, that's what I'm looking at for teams like that. So certainly possible for that, but Gwangboong to Boston, to me, is probably the best fit for Boston, and arguably the best fit for Gwangboong. Next, I want to talk about some main tanks. There's quite a few Korean main tanks that are now available because we saw a kind of cleaning of house for a lot of them. And we've seen some retire, like Gesture, and that's something we certainly are going to be seeing potential changes for. And we've seen, Smurf go to Seoul and Marvel go to Toronto. But there are still some openings now for potential main tank players to come in, and so where do they go? So one of the teams that needs a main tank, of course, is the Houston Outlaws. They don't have one right now. Their roster is pretty DPS heavy right now. Dante, Pelican, of course. They got Piggy, they got Iris, they got Lastro, so they could use a main support. Or a main tank, sorry. It was the main support, but we'll get there when we get there. They could use a main tank, right? So someone like Sado is available. He's always an option. They had Jjanggu and Dreamer last year. Both of those players are possibilities. But also the Philadelphia Fusion need a main tank. There are no rumors at the moment surrounding either of those two teams and their main tank potential. Philadelphia Fusion have history with Sado, so maybe they bring Sado back. I think Jjanggu is probably the top option at main tank right now. And if I'm the Fusion, he's probably the player I'm pursuing the most. Based on what we saw from him last season, he looked very, very strong. At times, he may not be the most flexible main tank, but I think his Reinhardt, his Winston, his Wrecking Ball were pretty solid. I don't think we saw much of his Orisa. I think Dreamer ended up playing a lot of it. But I also think Dreamer's a really good pick because Dreamer is super flexible. And I think Dreamer can be a really good main tank to have on a team when you're moving into a one-tank scenario where you want a tank who can play as many heroes as possible. I think Dreamer's a really good option as well. So for the Fusion, I think they have an option really at all. Any of these three, I think those are all really good potential main tank signings for any team that needs one. You have a team like the Valiant, who we don't know what the Valiant are doing. We don't know if they're going to be a Chinese roster, a Korean roster, a Western roster. No clue with the Valiant because they haven't announced anything yet. All they've announced is that they've gotten rid of everybody. So who knows what they could do. But I think that there are some good main tank options out there. And I think that the Fusion and the Outlaws are probably the best landing spots for any of those three. Houston is obviously, they brought back Dante, so there's no saying that just because the player leaves, they can't come back. The Spitfire brought back Hadi. In seasons past, we've seen the Fusion bring back EQO, so it's certainly possible they bring back one of those too. I think Jjanggu playing alongside Piggy makes sense, so they played together for a while. And you have Pelican on that team, so who knows what they're going to do there. But I'd say for main tank, Fusion, probably the best destination for any of those three, just because it's, in my opinion, the team that looks like they're on the up and up the most and look like they're dedicating a ton of resources, and the Fusion have always been really good. And I trust their coaching staff, so that'll be an interesting one to see. But let's continue on with tanks. Let's focus on some of the off tanks this time around. There's some good off tanks available that are people who played last season. Now, these are, for me, probably the most controversial 3 players I have on this list. I have GaeBullSsi, ToYou, and Gargoyle, because to me, these 3 are the definition of like middle of the pack off tanks. We've seen Gargoyle. We saw him, 2.5 seasons. We saw about a season and a half of ToYou. We didn't even really see all that much of GaeBullSsi. The other one on here you could also talk about is Michelle. I'm not really high on Michelle. I don't really think Michelle has proven to me that he's really like a notable off-tank figure, and I think people would rather sign veterans before they sign Michelle. Rookies before they sign Michelle. But to me, these 3, GaeBullSsi, ToYou, and Gargoyle, are probably the next best thing when it comes to off-tanks. GaeBullSsi is probably the number 1 option for anybody if you're going to sign a veteran. He has been around a while. He didn't get a ton of playtime last season, so he's a bit more of an unknown quantity. He's not necessarily a player who you know what you're going to get out of him. He hasn't definitely seen his potential realized. There are certainly concerns about him, considering he was benched in favor of Punk in a roster that, when Punk wasn't playing, would communicate in all Korean. And then when Punk played, they spoke English. So the team, the Boston Uprising, made it, in a sense, more difficult for them to communicate because Punk was better. So you kind of know GaeBullSsi, in theory, isn't as good as Punk. So maybe you feel more confident in someone like Gargoyle, who has been a little bit more successful in his Overwatch League career. And when you consider the rumors about New York, they need an off-tank. They have reportedly Kuki coming in as their head coach. They're bringing in Yaki. They're bringing in Gangnam Jin. Maybe you decide to bring in Gargoyle with your New York, right? Instead of going for GaeBullSsi, who's a bit more of an unknown quantity, maybe you instead opt to bring in Gargoyle, who you're more familiar with. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Gargoyle. I don't think Gargoyle is all that great. I think Gargoyle is okay. And I think when you are reportedly bringing in a rookie main tank like Kellen, though he's not really a rookie, he's been kind of around for a while. But when you're reportedly bringing in a main tank like Kellen, I feel like your best option is either to bring in somebody who you can trust more to be a leader, even if he's not playing all the time. I don't know if Gargoyle is that. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens, but these are the 3 main off-tanks. New York is a potential landing spot for both of them. Also, or all 3 of them. Also Philadelphia Fusion. They don't have a tank line yet. Right now they are a DPS lineup, and that is it. So certainly tank is necessary for the Fusion as well. That's kind of their biggest need right now, is a tank line. Because they have everything else figured out, really. But it's really just, they don't have any tanks yet. And we don't know what to expect for tanks, I guess, in Overwatch 2, but it is still something I feel like you gotta figure out. Next, I'm going to do a pair of main supports, though I don't think either of them have a... I think that they don't have the same best fit, which is interesting to me. First one is FDGod, of course. Very good player, played for the Shock last season, did not have the best season of his career, but still a fantastic season, all things considered. To me, FDGod's kind of best landing spot when I look at the team, when I look at him and just kind of where he could fit in, to me it's London. London right now, that's the thing they don't have, is a main support. They have 3 DPS players. They have a main tank player, an off tank player, in terms of the heroes that they play, and they have a flex support and provide. They don't have a main support. I think FDGod could be that perfect main support for them. I think he would fill in a need for that roster, and so I wouldn't be surprised to see them target him. I don't expect him to go back to the shock. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. So that to me is really kind of the best spot for him. Paris already has their main support. They're sticking with Dredro. I think Dredro had a good season, so I'm not that surprised. We know the Gladiators have their main support. You know, a lot of the Western rosters kind of have somebody. Houston does not. That's certainly a possibility as well. But who knows? The other team that kind of needs a main support is the Florida Mayhem. They don't have one yet. They have a flex support in Sir Majid, but they don't have a main support. But I think Florida's better option at main support, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people will yell at me for this one. I feel like you go with Moth, because Moth is older. He's a veteran presence. This Mayhem roster is looking very young and very inexperienced. I think Moth could be a good piece to bring it together, kind of have that veteran leader, that figure in there. He's played alongside Mirror. He would be a really good fit, I think, on this Mayhem roster. You know, he's played with Korean players, so when you have someone like Checkmate, and then there's reportedly, I think somebody else is joining this roster who might be a main support. Someone, I think is his name. No, he's a tank player. I take that back. He's a main tank player. He's reportedly joining the roster, so they really don't have a main support. That's the one thing they don't have is main support, and so I think that would be a good move. Is bring in Moth to be that veteran leader, to lead this team as the kind of shot caller, the decision maker, veteran presence who's been there, who's won championships, would bring a lot of experience to this relatively inexperienced Mayhem roster. So I think that's a really good spot for him. Houston Outlaws potentially as well. Pair him with Dante, someone he's played with in the past. There's some Korean players there, and we know he's worked with Korean players in the past, Western players in the past. You put him with a coach that he knows, with Junkbuck. So I think one of those two is probably the most likely for him. And then for FDGod, for me, like, that's London, man. If I'm London, he is my number one free agent signing I have to try to target for the rest of the season, because he's just so good. He's so dynamic. He's a very explosive player. He brings a lot of potential in that regard. That is, to me, what what London needs to be better at, because they were not a very explosive team last season. They were pretty boring and pretty slow, and they just didn't really make those big moments. But when you're adding Poco and you have Glister in your rival team, right, in Paris, right, you have to be able to rival that Paris Eternal team, right? You need more pizzazz, right? And while I think that Shax and Sparker have looked really good, you need somebody to really kind of be that piece that kind of keeps the team aggressive and flowing. And to me, FDGod is that piece. So FDGod, to me, best spot for him would be London Spitfire. Final player I want to bring up is one who I don't really know what to make of. It's nice. And this is really, for me, kind of, I'm looking at one team that I think really needs to kind of just round out what they have right now, and that is the NYXL. When it comes to their DPS lineup, right, they have Flora, they have Yaki, right? Yaki can play a lot of what Nice can play, right? But if I'm in like a Tracer May meta, I don't feel like I'm losing out with Flora on Tracer, because Flora is a very good Tracer as well. But I also feel like it's not a bad idea to just have somebody who can maybe be a Pharah, if you don't really want to have Yaki on that role, though Yaki is a very good Pharah. So it's an interesting one for me. But really, to me, this is kind of like, if I'm the LA Valiant, what am I doing, right? Because we don't know anything about the LA Valiant yet. Do they go after a Korean roster? Do they go after somebody like Nice? Nice, to me, is one of those rookies who's in a really odd spot where I don't really know what to expect from him. I don't really know what team would go after him, because I think Flex DPS right now is one of the least clear roles that is very heavily needed, because a lot of the teams, I feel like, have found their Flex DPS. But something just feels like there is going to be a team like in New York or potentially even like a San Francisco, though I think they're pretty good with what they have, considering Sam is a pretty big flex DPS. Or maybe even like I don't know. It just feels like there's a need somewhere, somebody, maybe even like the Hangzhou Spark, Architect and Shy. That's, Architect plays some flex DPS heroes. Like he's known for his Genji, his Doomfist Farah. Like he's known for a lot of those heroes. Maybe they go for somebody. I don't really know. It's difficult, but he's a player who I think will find his way onto a team. I just don't know what team that'll be at this point because it's very unclear to me what team is in need of him. He just seems like a player who's going to end up on a roster based on what we've seen from him in the past. He's still pretty young, so he still provides a decent amount. So he's a player I have my eyes on. I don't fully know where he'll land. If I had to guess, my best bet for him would probably be... I don't think he'll return to Toronto because I think that they want somebody who's a little more well-rounded. I feel like New York is probably his best bet, or the Valiant. Like, really, there's the only two I can really think of right now. Even though New York's a weird fit. The Valiant, who knows what they're doing, but we'll have to wait and see. So that's it for a little rambly thing. Just wanted to kind of have this video. Let me know, guys know if you enjoyed it. Pretty light for this one just because I'm not feeling the best. So it's a little, just kind of chill and casual. But hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys want to see more like this in the future. Hoping to do more stuff talking about the offseason, talking about players. I'd like to do some stuff talking about some of the rookies as we get closer to more signings being announced. And as we get closer to the season, of course, I'll be doing my roster breakdown. So we're not finished yet. We still have a lot of stuff going on, but that's all for me for now. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, like, subscribe. Comment down below where you think any of these free agents could land, or if there's one I didn't mention where you think they could land. As always, hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. Love each other. Be safe. And until next time, bye-bye.